I'm going to marry my deceased brother's wife, so we're getting a divorce.
Huh? I stared intently at Kevin's face.
Look at this.
Saying that, Kevin held up his left hand, which now sported a ring I had never seen before. Definitely not our wedding ring,
Sarah gave it to me.
Kevin said, laughing smugly, flaunting it in front of me, as if he had won some competition. But unfortunately for him, I no longer harbored enough affection for Kevin to feel any anger. It's refreshing, I said with a smile, signing the divorce papers fluidly. Kevin watched me in shock. He must have thought I would cling to him crying. Well then, I'll file these for us. I put the pen in my breast pocket and quickly folded the divorce papers, slipping them into my bag. Leaving them with careless Kevin might mean they'd never get submitted, potentially delaying my happiness. I wasn't about to let that happen. I'll go submit this right away. With a firm resolve but a pleasant face, I stood up. Seeing my smile, Kevin nervously spoke up.
Make sure you actually submit those. I have no feelings left for you.
What a blissfully ignorant man. He still thinks I'm hung up on him. A wave of discomfort surged from the bottom of my heart. I assured him with a smile. Don't worry. I feel the same.
Thanks. I'm going to be happy.
That was the last conversation we had as a married couple. Because as soon as I left the cafe, I sprinted to submit the divorce papers as immaturely as fast as I could. My name is Michelle. I'm a 30-year-old office worker. I have been married for 2 years to Kevin, a coworker who is 2 years older than me, and we live with his family. We don't have any children. I wanted to have children as soon as possible, considering my age and career, but Kevin was opposed to it.
Don't you want to enjoy life, just the two of us, for a bit longer? I want to focus on my work for now.
However, unfortunately, his work performance wasn't great. He's too careless. Despite being in sales, he often forgets clients' specific demands and conditions. He frequently misses little confirmations or communications. Because of that, his clients often cut ties after a few transactions, and he never managed long-term contracts. Moreover, fatally, Kevin himself thinks these mistakes are trivial. He's always been the cheerful, likable guy at work, always at the center of everyone's attention. But he's never been valued in performance reviews and remains a regular employee indefinitely. Yet, he believes he deserves much higher recognition. I knew about his dissatisfaction and that there was no prospect of it being resolved. Still, I loved Kevin's flawed nature. The way he'd fall asleep on the living room sofa right away. The way he got too excited during drives and sped up. Maybe it's because I've always lived as an elder sister, but I found Kevin, who was like a younger brother, irresistibly adorable. And there was another woman who doted on Kevin, his mother, Linda. Linda had 2 sons, but her affection was extremely biased towards Kevin, her younger son. It's almost as if she would gladly sacrifice her elder son, Ted, for Kevin's happiness. The reason we've been living with his family ever since we got married is mostly because Linda didn't want to be separated from Kevin. Linda doted on Kevin so much because there was a reason for it. Ted was the son of a previous wife, and Linda was his stepmother. Because of this, Ted's presence in the family home was always somewhat shadowy. Kevin himself seemed to look down on Ted completely. He was always in his room, and it was hard to tell if he was there or not. However, he wasn't gloomy. He went to work normally, ate meals with everyone, and then rested in his room. He didn't watch TV or drink tea with others after meals. And when it was his day off, he would quickly go off on solo trips. He was just an incredibly quiet man. It had always been like this, seldom voicing his opinions or desires, always calmly agreeing with Linda and Kevin's suggestions with a mild, "that's nice." So eventually, both of them stopped listening to Ted's opinions altogether. Even 2 years ago, when I got married, he just calmly expressed his congratulations and never talked or had dinner with me. But he said, "Congratulations." And the amount he gifted was incredibly generous, about 20 times the usual rate.
Wow, nice. Should we upgrade our flight for the honeymoon?
Kevin, oblivious to the generosity of Ted's gift, gleefully upgraded our honeymoon flight to business class. For someone as common as me, the amount was so high, I was completely at a loss about what to return as a gift. In a panic, I consulted Linda, who unhelpfully speculated. Maybe he knows he won't get married himself. Maybe he's living his dreams through Kevin? But ultimately, there was no particular intention behind Ted's actions, and our relationship continued at a comfortably good distance. Day by day, he led a calm life, going out on weekends. It seemed that Ted would just continue to age this way. We all thought so, for no particular reason. However, on a beautifully clear day in spring, we were all shocked. Ted had decided to get married. Both Kevin and Linda had assumed Ted would never marry, so the family home turned upside down with the news. And the partner was
Nice to meet you. I'm Sarah.
the person who came to the family home to announce the marriage was a tall woman with the fairy-like translucence. She was said to be 30 years old, the same age as me, but looked younger. Dressed in a chiffon dress, with lightly curled hair and elegant yet prominent makeup, she exuded the refinement of a well-bred young lady. Later, Linda told me her father was the president of a renowned pharmaceutical company. Ted would marry into her family and eventually take over the business. That the quiet Ted had planned such a spectacular marriage was beyond belief. To put it crudely, there was no more impressive grand slam than this. Kevin could only stare blankly at Sarah's grace, while Linda, hearing about Sarah's background, was fervently digging for something to criticize, trying to find any dissatisfaction with Sarah to prick at. Linda, unaware that her scheming was written all over her face, persistently asked about Sarah's childhood and student life. Unfortunately for Linda, Sarah was a lady without blemish. From kindergarten through high school, she attended prestigious schools and even went to a state university in Massachusetts. After that, she studied in France and had only recently returned to the US.
I don't know much about the US, but Ted has always been kind to me.
Sarah said, blushing as she and Ted exchanged smiles. They truly were a well-matched couple. I thought this gentlewoman could surely understand the quiet and mild-mannered Ted. Congratulations. I wish you both happiness. I sincerely wished them well, but
What do you mean, congratulations? Aren't you upset?
as soon as Ted and Sarah left, Kevin, who had gotten upset, confronted me. Upset? About what?
Because Ted snagged such a great woman and is marrying into money.
He is a good man, right?
What? You think he's better than me? How could my brother get such a...
I don't understand many things. Firstly, though it may sound harsh, Kevin doesn't come close to Ted in terms of looks or education. And while I think Sarah is indeed a good woman, I don't understand why that would be upsetting. If he were a good brother, he'd be happy that his brother found a good wife. Just a while ago, he was worrying about, what if Ted stays single? Who will care for him in his old age?
It's not something to be happy about. If I were single, that woman would have definitely fallen for me. Then I could have been the next president.
Right. Kevin would have been more suitable as president.
I was utterly appalled, watching the two in front of me. How could they say such baseless things? Overwhelmed by the absurdity, I took a sip of the tea left in my cup. It had completely cooled, leaving only bitterness in my mouth. As I grimaced at the bitterness, I suddenly became aware of their gaze. It was Kevin and Linda.
If only you were from a better family.
Yeah, maybe I married the wrong person. Maybe I should try to woo Sarah now.
Their cold stares were fixed on me. I looked up at the sky and sighed. If he really wants to be president that badly, Kevin should start his own company rather than chasing after a president's daughter. They must have realized my icy gaze.
Geez, it's just a joke. Don't be so uptight, okay?
Yeah, just a light joke. How about some coffee?
With that, Linda disappeared into the kitchen, and Kevin avoided my gaze, aimlessly flipping through TV channels. I gathered the dishes on the table and took them to the kitchen. Linda was there, boiling water, seemingly waiting for me.
But really, what if Kevin had been single? What do you think would have happened?
This conversation was still going on. Linda seemed to really want Kevin and Sarah to be together, dazzled by the sudden appearance of a president's daughter, unable to discern right from wrong. What do you think? Well, if that were the case, I probably wouldn't have married Kevin in the first place with this kind of talk. Leaving just that comment, I roughly set the dishes in the sink, then dashed up the stairs to my room, grabbed my wallet, and stormed out of the house. Sitting peacefully at the table just wasn't possible in this mood. I'm going to the fast food place near the station and will indulge in whatever I like. I'm going to eat a triple burger today. Let Linda know. As I texted that, Kevin instantly replied, asking me to take out food for them too.
Really? Get us some too. Mom's cooking sucks.
Just seeing his carefree message increased my irritation. He clearly doesn't care about my feelings or my position. He treats me as if I'm an emotionless helper robot. From the window seat, I could see the dimly lit sky and people hurrying home, probably to someone kind waiting for them. While catching this scene from the corner of my eye, I bit into my thick burger with a vengeance. As I ate, the balance between the buns fell apart, and the burger sauce started to drip. Maybe our marriage had similarly lost its balance without us realizing. I wiped the sauce from my fingers with a napkin, lost in thought. Yet, I still love Kevin. I want to spend time with him, to laugh by his side. That's why, despite such insults, I end up buying their share too. They'll probably take it for granted, without a word of thanks. Doubtful I'll even see my money back. Knowing this, I don't have the option to push Kevin away. And so, with a warm bag in hand, I trudged back to my in-laws' house. But the turmoil didn't end there. When Ted safely finished his wedding and moved into his new home with Sarah, Kevin and Linda's envy only intensified. Perhaps the fact that their new home was a high-rise apartment near a station in an urban area irritated their complex. They would imagine Ted's newlywed life with envy and look up similar high-rise apartments online, sighing as they admired them.
Wow, a 38-story building. How nice. You could invite friends over, even have a barbecue.
I had never heard of Linda having friends, and she certainly had never barbecued. I had a lot to say, but I didn't have the energy to indulge Linda's fantasies. By that time, I was daily tormented by Kevin's demands for a divorce, and he did it in a sneaky way. Every day, Kevin would nitpick over minor household mistakes. A small wrinkle left on a shirt, the seasoning of the food. The toilet paper was left with only the tube. The list could go on. Kevin, acting like a child throwing a tantrum, would blow these trivial matters out of proportion.
If things like this keep happening, I can't stay with you. We're getting a divorce.
Typically, the wrinkles on the shirt were his fault for sitting on it on the sofa, and the seasoning of the food was to his taste preference. The toilet paper was an issue while I was away on a business trip for 2 days. He could have just replaced the roll himself. Having all his complaints rebutted like this, Kevin finally seemed to realize that obtaining a divorce on my fault would be difficult. But things didn't stop there. Kevin committed an outrageous act. It happened at the company where Kevin and I work. One afternoon, a shout rang out in the sales department.
I can't do this petty job. I might become a president someday.
Shocked, I looked up. Across the sales floor, a man was standing and yelling. When I realized it was Kevin, I instinctively ran toward the sales department. Kevin stood there defiantly while his colleagues and bosses watched him in stunned silence from a distance. It was as if time had stopped right there. I heard from a colleague that Kevin had, as usual, forgotten a deadline set by a client. Unfortunately, the deadline was for a presentation on which the client had staked their business fortunes, and the pamphlets and novelties our company was supposed to deliver were essential. The presentation ended in a major failure without the materials, and we received a severe complaint from the client. There was even talk of potential legal action for damages, but Kevin refused to admit his mistake.
What? I wasn't told any deadline. It's their fault the presentation failed, isn't it?
However, it was evident from the emails in Kevin's inbox that he had been informed of the deadline, and he received a severe reprimand from his boss. That line was the result. That outburst was probably the result of his fantasies about marrying a president's daughter, Sarah, and becoming president himself. For a man in his 30s, it was embarrassingly childish and shoddy. Embarrassed, he ended up resigning. Kevin must be feeling quite dejected. My main worry was that, however,
If I had married Sarah, I could have been a president. Since I settled for you, you should earn the income.
rather than feeling remorse for being unemployed, Kevin demanded that I make up for the lost income by finding a job, even suggesting that I look at ads for nightclubs or strip clubs. There were certainly things Kevin should be doing before suggesting such drastic measures. Why should I, who have done nothing wrong, have to resort to such side jobs?
Well, if you don't earn money like Sarah, Kevin might leave you.
Even Linda chimed in, teasing gleefully. Well, if Kevin had married someone as charming as Sarah, he might not want to live with you, Linda. Maybe you should start looking for a job now, too. After saying that, I happened to pick up a crumpled job advertisement for a janitor in a nearby building that was in the mailbox and casually dropped it in front of Linda before heading back to my room. In the bedroom, as usual, Kevin's clothes were left discarded just where he'd taken them off. I was about to hang them up, but I stopped. For some reason, I just didn't feel like doing it. In the end, I left Kevin's clothes as they were and went to bed. Kevin was furious when he saw his wrinkled clothes, but seeing that stirred no emotion in me. I may be at my limit. I secretly resolved myself to that possibility. But at that delicate moment, something unexpected happened. Ted had died. It was a sudden illness. Ted suddenly collapsed one day and never regained consciousness, passing away shortly after. It had all happened in just a few days. Even though Sarah had only been married for half a year, she managed the wake and the funeral with stoic fortitude. Tears in her eyes, occasionally shivering as she held back her grief, those around her struggled to keep from crying too. Yet in this scene of sorrow, two people seemed oddly unaffected by the sadness. The deceased's mother and brother, Linda and Kevin. They looked around and whispered to each other, oblivious to how audible they were to me nearby.
Look at those flowers. I wonder how much they cost. Impressive. Do you think it's okay if we take them home after this is all over?
And what about all this money spent by Ted? Instead of wasting it on the funeral, they should have given it to us.
For Kevin, Ted was his real brother, and for Linda, his stepmother, it was all about the money even though her eldest son had died. I felt so embarrassed. I wished I could sink into the ground. On the other hand,
Sarah still looks beautiful. even when she's crying.
Now's your chance, Kevin. She's vulnerable. Be nice to her, and she'll fall right into your lap.
Are these people even human? They seemed more focused on winning over the widow Sarah than mourning the eternal parting from his brother. Within a week, they were already putting their plans into action.
Sarah's all alone now. I'll go check on her at Ted's house.
Unbelievably, Kevin began to frequently visit the apartment where Ted and Sarah lived. For Kevin and Linda, it was like a paradise.
Just as you'd expect from the daughter of the CEO, she bought the entire 38th floor of that high-rise building. Since Ted and Sarah had no children, we will get something out of it.
But things didn't go as smoothly as they hoped. Just then, Sarah's pregnancy came to light. None of Ted's inheritance would go to Linda. Sarah and the child she was expecting would inherit everything. Upon hearing this, Linda spurred Kevin on even more.
You must marry Sarah at all costs.
But it seems like it's Ted's kid.
What are you talking about? Even if the child is born, if you have a child with her, Sarah's wealth will be ours.
Kevin, now highly motivated, shamelessly pursued Sarah, claiming concern for Sarah's well-being due to her pregnancy. He visited her apartment every single day. If he had that much free time, he should have been looking for a job.
It's tough for Sarah, being pregnant for the first time. I'm just helping out.
Kevin claimed, but I didn't care. If he wants to, he should. There was no way the dignified Sarah would accept Kevin. Ted had not been gone long. That's what I thought. But then, that day came all of a sudden.
Hey, we should get divorced.
Kevin fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, placing it on the table in front of us. It was a divorce paper.
I'm going to marry my deceased brother's wife, so I'm divorcing you.
What? I stared at Kevin's face intently.
Look at this.
He flaunted a ring on his left hand, one I had never seen before. Certainly not our wedding ring.
Sarah gave it to me.
Kevin said, laughing smugly, flaunting it in front of me, as if he had won some competition. But unfortunately for him, I no longer harbored enough affection for Kevin to feel any anger. Sure, that's fine. It's quite refreshing, actually. I smiled cheerily and signed the divorce application, which seemed to shock Kevin. He must have expected me to cling to him, crying, "Well, I'll file it for you." I pocketed the pen and folded the document neatly into my bag. It would be a problem if I left it with the unreliable Kevin and it ended up not being submitted. With a firm resolve, though my face remained pleasant, I stood up.
Make sure you file it properly. As far as I'm concerned, I have no feelings left for you.
His words, implying I still harbored feelings for him, only increased my discomfort. It was already unpleasant to think we had been on the same page about this. Don't worry, I feel the same.
Thanks. I'm going to be happy.
My sarcasm didn't register with him, and this exchange ended up being our last conversation as a couple. As soon as I left the cafe, I sprinted to file the divorce papers. I'll never forget the exhilaration I felt then. Freedom. After submitting, I threw my hands up to the blue sky and shouted at the top of my lungs. Passersby turned around in surprise, but I didn't care. Only then did I realize how much stress I had been under. Economic uncertainty, dignity threatened, unpaid labor, and unprotected privacy. What was supposed to be a new family life with Kevin had felt more like living in a cramped corner of a family owned by Linda and Kevin. Indeed, that house was never truly my place. Without going back to my in-laws' house, I rented a room near my workplace and started a new life commuting from there. Though Linda and Kevin sent several disparaging emails insisting on a proper farewell for the divorce, I ignored them completely. Thinking back, it was truly a blessing that Kevin had quit his job. It spared me the hassle of seeing him at work and, considering his personality, likely prevented numerous conflicts, as the workplace was somewhat sympathetic towards me. Being single again brought an unexpected lightness to my life, and I began receiving offers for domestic and international business trips. No longer needing to prepare meals in advance or bow my head to Linda and Kevin for household chores during my trips was liberating. Everything moved at my pace, and I reveled in this newfound freedom. Then came a turning point. After skillfully managing my business trips, I was thrilled to have my transfer to the place I'd always dreamed of, Alaska. The historic streets of Juneau, countless breathtaking sights, the culinary city of Sitka, and the restaurants in Anchorage. It felt like I was on cloud nine. Since my divorce, it seems like only good things have been happening. I quickly vacated my rental apartment and flew to Alaska. Having a mother from Alaska and returning there every year since I was a child, it felt like a second home to me. I was familiar with the geography, and above all, the food was fantastic. The incredible snow accumulation and the freezing winter air, the crisp, pleasant summers. The town I had long admired and visited many times welcomed me warmly. Here, no one saw me as the infamous lousy employee's ex-wife, nor as the ex-wife abandoned by the brother who chased after his sister-in-law. It was incredibly comfortable. One day, after finishing work, I looked up to see snowflakes in October, an early first snow that would be unthinkable at my in-laws. It had a delicate, ephemeral beauty, but anyone living here knew well that this delicate winter sprite could freeze many lives. I zipped my down jacket up to the collar and hurried home, not to be deceived by the beauty of the snow. A year later, I had safely completed my tenure in Alaska and returned to my original workplace. Despite everything, I think it was a fun year. I got along well with the people at the new location, and we even shared our dreams and life stories. Some became friends who exchanged contact details with me, and there were people with whom I could likely have good relationships. Since marrying Kevin, I had been constantly caught up in housework and my job, always commuting between home and work. It wasn't a burden because I loved Kevin, but this new environment where I didn't have to do anything but work was so comfortable it completely changed my perspective. My time was my own. I liked this town so much that, if possible, I would have stayed forever. No, I think I will definitely return to this town someday. I don't know when that will be. When I returned to my old job after a long holiday, feeling a sense of reluctance, I was surprised. Standing in front of the workplace was
Finally, I found you. Where have you been?
Kevin said as he approached, perhaps because he no longer belonged to this workplace. Unable to enter the workplace premises, Kevin stood at the gate like a lost child, exposed to the curious stares of passersby. Upon spotting me, Kevin's face broke into a relieved, nostalgic smile as he hurried over. I felt an urge to run away. His clothes were quite old, with stains of unknown origin, and he emanated an odd smell. Additionally, most of the buttons were missing, and his clothes were frayed and torn in places. Kevin himself was no better off. His hair was unkempt, his body was filthy, and his eyes, teeth, and much of him appeared yellowed. The teeth visible in his grinning mouth were decayed and chipped. I had been dispatched to a wildfire disaster site through work before, but even after a week without a bath, I had never become that unclean. He was so scruffy and dirty that I wanted to pretend I didn't know him. Those who knew the old Kevin might not recognize him now. It was hard to believe he had once worked here. He looked so out of place at my workplace. Did Kevin realize this incongruence?
I've been looking for you all this time. You forgot to give me your new address, didn't you?
Kevin looked at me with a weary smile, as if he were dealing with a clumsy child. The old me would have blushed and giggled, pleased at being looked at that way by Kevin. But now, surprisingly, I felt nothing.
Since then, I've had a lot to think about.
Taking my silence for consent, Kevin quickly sat down on a nearby curb and, gazing solemnly at the sunset, began to recount his experiences. Apparently, after we parted, Kevin diligently visited Sarah's apartment day and night. In reality, a housekeeper who had looked after Sarah since her childhood was always with her, so they were never alone. But by becoming a conversation partner and confidant for the pregnant Sarah, Kevin gradually got her to open up to him. They even started talking about the future, which delighted Kevin and Linda immensely. They were ecstatic, thinking they could get Ted's inheritance, the pharmaceutical company presidency, and all of Sarah's family's wealth. Brimming with enthusiasm, Kevin was about to greet Sarah's parents.
Gruzi. We Jets innen.
What?
That's a greeting in Swiss German, meaning hello, how are you? Yes, Sarah was born and raised in America, but her father was Swiss. After all, her father's pharmaceutical company was located in Switzerland, and Sarah herself had features that reflected her European heritage, and it should have been obvious with a little thought.
What am I supposed to know about that? I didn't know he wasn't American.
He took his anger out on me. Even when Ted had mentioned it during their marriage introduction, it really hit home again how this man never listened to others. By the way, are you aware of the linguistic situation in Switzerland? They use 4 official languages: French, Italian, Romansh, and Swiss German. Apparently, there are also dialects, and it's so complex that even residents of Switzerland consider moving towns due to language issues. Sarah's family was fluent in all these languages and in English, but her father was the only one who couldn't speak English. In Sarah's home, they mainly spoke Swiss German to accommodate her father. So Kevin spent that entire meal sweating profusely, unable to join in the conversation at all. Both Sarah and her mother tried their best to translate, but Kevin just sat there in awkward silence, sweating and quietly eating his meal. Sarah's family must have been quite perplexed. According to Sarah, Ted had effortlessly managed the Swiss language situation and conversed without any trouble. Ted's intelligence never ceased to amaze me. Ultimately, Sarah's parents tried to make conversation topics for Kevin's sake, but they were deeply disappointed with his silent response. If only he had realized his place.
If Ted could do it, so can I.
Kevin decided to try and learn Swiss German. He joined a language school that cost several $1,000s and attended whenever he could. It was one-on-one tutoring that felt like bills were flying away each session. But no matter how good the classes, Kevin's natural fickleness fully emerged, and he only learned greetings before declaring, "What really matters is the heart," and then stopped making any effort. What made things worse for Kevin was the high level of culture in Sarah's family. There was table manners, musical instruments, dancing, wine knowledge, Swiss history, the world economy, and more than anything else Kevin had ever touched. The world they live in is completely different. To keep up with Sarah, Kevin had to make various prior investments, wearing custom-made suits, enjoying orchestra concerts, musicals, and operas. This was how Sarah's family spent their weekends. All these performances required expensive tickets and substantial cultural knowledge to enjoy. Lacking such culture, Kevin gradually began to dread the weekends. That wasn't all. He suddenly bought a large SUV, a luxury car, to pick up and drop off pregnant Sarah. That alone cost $80,000. By this point, Kevin's savings, being unemployed, were exhausted. If he had recognized the difference in their worlds and turned back then, it would have been better. But Linda spurred him on even further.
Don't give up. You must become worthy of Sarah.
To marry Sarah and Kevin, Linda then started throwing her own money into the cause. I couldn't help but laugh. I remembered Kevin lying sprawled on the worn-out sofa at his parents' house, clad in a sweatsuit. Indeed, trying to educate someone like Kevin was like casting pearls before swine. As far as I knew, his dining manners were terrible. Biting off chunks of food or lifting plates was just the tip of the iceberg. Kevin had never properly held cutlery, always skewering his food on a fork from childhood, and Linda would even eat with her knees up on the chair. I wished Kevin, who would eventually become a father, would use his cutlery properly. But Linda stopped that too.
Let him hold the cutlery however he likes. It's not like there's a law against it.
Table manners truly reveal a person's upbringing. For the first time, I was grateful for my grandmother and mother's strict teaching. Always use it properly so as not to discomfort others. The idea of someone who can't even properly use cutlery gaining international sophistication is laughable. Ultimately, Kevin and Linda never tried to gain any real culture. They just kept pouring money into imitating Sarah's lifestyle. Had they continued this for years or decades, maybe they would have gained some refinement. But before that could happen, they ran out of money. And at the same time, a shocking truth came to light.
My father is retiring soon. He and my mother are planning their second life together.
What?
In a panic, Kevin asked Sarah for details. It turned out her uncle would be taking over the company. Basically, Sarah's father had written Kevin off long ago and had already set plans in motion to hand the company over to his brother. I couldn't help but laugh. The considerations of the elite are indeed different. Moreover, Sarah decided to return to Switzerland, her father's homeland, to have her baby and raise it there.
After all, I'll need to support my uncle eventually and get involved in research and development.
But what about me?
You're free to do as you please.
What about this ring? Weren't we engaged?
Trembling, Kevin thrust the ring Sarah had given him in her face. But her response was absurdly comical.
Oh, that's just a thimble for sewing. I gave it to you because you always wore shirts with missing buttons to remind you to fix them quickly.
I loved you, Sarah. That's why I've always been by your side.
Thank you for your kindness, but it was always unpleasant. Your eating habits are disgusting. You never learn manners no matter how much I teach, and you still can't tell Wagner from Tchaikovsky after all this time.
Sarah chuckled.
I always thought you were stupid. You're nothing like Ted.
At that moment, Kevin made a move as if to grab the heavily pregnant Sarah. However, he was soon seized by Sarah's housekeeper and handed over to the police. A slim, elderly Caucasian woman with a background in lightweight boxing.
You can't even box, and you're American. Maybe you should learn a bit more about your own culture.
The housekeeper sneered as she held him back. After being scolded at the police station and released, Kevin found that Sarah and her family had already left their penthouse and moved out of the country. The old me would have said something like, "Oh dear, that's tough," and comforted Kevin unconditionally. But the words that came out now were icy. Is that so? Kevin looked at me dumbfounded.
You know I don't want to hear that kind of thing.
That's right. Every time he sought comfort like this, I would pat his head and encourage him, hoping to inspire some motivation. But I had no desire to do that anymore. Sorry, but don't come here anymore. I'm getting married because I already have someone with whom I pledged my future. I'd already been proposed to by a man I met in Alaska. I want to grow old with you. He vowed so to me. When I told Kevin, he was furious.
What? Weren't you waiting for me?
His movement to grab me stopped midair as someone held him firmly.
What are you doing to my fiancé?
It was my fiancé, Tom. Tom was the young ace of the Alaska branch, soon to be promoted to branch manager. Moreover, he was also a rugby player. When Kevin saw Tom's robust physique, all the fervor he had shown towards me seemed to vanish. He wilted and was soon handed over to the police. Given that he had attempted to assault a woman twice, the police didn't overlook his actions, and Kevin ended up spending the night in jail.
Kevin has done nothing wrong.
Linda protested loudly, but was told by a police officer,
Ma'am, your son has done plenty wrong.
after which she dejectedly went home. Having spent almost all her savings dreaming of Kevin and Sarah's marriage, Linda couldn't afford his bail or legal fees. Instead, she demanded something from me.
Go to the police and apologize. Say it was all your fault.
Linda came to me and insisted that I retract my complaint. Despite our relationship, I couldn't back down. I hired a lawyer and filed a complaint against both of them. Consequently, mother and son both ended up in police custody. Probably pleased Linda, as she always wanted to be with Kevin. As for me, I successfully announced my marriage at work, and it looks like I'll be able to move back to Alaska with Tom by the end of the year. Upon sharing this news, I received congratulatory messages and a pair of expensive Swiss-made watches. The sender was Sarah. It turned out she had been consulting me because Kevin was constantly showing up at her place. She found it so bothersome that it could have led to police involvement. Since Kevin was still legally my husband, Sarah was very considerate. However, once I mentioned I planned to divorce, Sarah kept him distracted until I could separate from him safely. I am grateful for her help. Thanks to Sarah, I was able to cleanly sever ties with Kevin and Linda. Now, I look forward to living honestly and turning towards those who genuinely care for me.